could be a useful way of bridging information gap. To improve ease of meeting product standards, again, I think the two countries need to exchange information on the regulatory regimes. It's all there on the website, but for some reason it's not easily accessible. We've tried to put it on our own website as well, so that it's easily accessible. But maybe more work needs to be done, and we were thinking that maybe for some key commodities, we could do flow charts that could exhibit the import and export process, and which covering procedures and documents, regulatory requirements and relevant authorities, which could be displayed on the web portal. An important information that a lot of people miss is that in India and Pakistan, both countries' national accreditation bodies, the lab testing accreditation bodies, are members of the international body ILAC. And this itself means that we should be recognizing any laboratory that is accredited by these accreditation bodies should be accepted by both countries, and this makes it very simple. And that's how I think within 2 days there was an agreement signed between the two countries on textile imports, and maybe that is what can be replicated to all other countries as well. On business facilitation, visa regime needs to be improved, measures to ensure no specific city-specific visas, exemption from police reporting. I mean, all of it, we're familiar with all these issues and they need to be addressed, and maybe one needs to think of more innovative ways of dealing with the visa issue. I mean, just like I think it was a very innovative way of thinking of changing the terminology to non-discriminatory market access, because it's gone down very well with both countries and the terminology is WTO compliant. And maybe something like this, if we open our minds to visas, we can put our minds to it and see how this can be dealt with. On expanding trade regimes which require more specialized logistics services, as I said earlier, large logistics service providers should be encouraged, and particularly from the private sector in Pakistan, where the logistics services are largely handled by the National Logistics Cell, and if private players are allowed to come in, there would be greater competition and services would improve. On customs and documentation procedures, I think going electronic is the way, and encouraging risk management systems would reduce the time taken. Also, the system of authorized trader status should be introduced to reduce security checks at land ports as well. Right now, it's there only at seaports. On improving infrastructure at ports, I think even though we've mentioned all these, they were so explicitly mentioned by the two commerce ministers that if that's implemented, then there's nothing really left to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nisha ji, for making aware of the perception survey, and of course some of the points that you highlighted, especially awareness indicators, they were extremely interesting and important. Now we'll hear from Syed Turab Hussain, who is an associate professor and acting chair of the economics department at Lahore University of Management Sciences. They also conducted a stakeholder survey, the perception survey, and the feelings about Pakistan-India trade, especially on automobile, pharmaceutical and agriculture sector. So about 15 minutes, Turab?
10 minutes, 10-15 minutes.
That would be great.
I can't predict. Anyway, thank you very much, Abed and Nisha, for a very informative presentation and an overview. So it's a pleasure being here, and it's the first time I'm going to be talking about Pakistan-India trade in India. One. Number two, here we have, some of you are aware of the South Asian Economic Students Meet. I just wanted to say that we have two members, Deb Kasum Das, who's the coordinator India, and Salim Rehan, coordinator Bangladesh. We're sharing the stage of SESM, and they're a group of students, supporters who've come specially to see us, present on Pak India Trade, who've been in Lahore and are part of the SESM network. So thank you very much for coming. Anyway, so let me start off. So I'm going to give an overview of Pak India Trade on similar lines as Nisha. What I'm going to do also is go over some of the work which we've done at LUMS in collaboration with a senior economist, Dr. Mohsin Khan, who works for the Atlantic Council. And this work has been done for the past year and a half or so. There's a whole lot of papers which we've written here because of paucity of time. I'm just going to concentrate on a couple of things which we've done. That is the stakeholder analysis, where we went around the country, met chambers of commerce and industry. This was a year ago, right at the second thaw of relationships in 2012-13. And we got an opinion about what they felt about trade, exporting sectors, those sectors which are not exporting, focusing just on the domestic market. Then more recently what we did was a lot of secondary literature and work done by our colleagues identified that there are three sectors in Pakistan at least which feel the threat or feel threatened because of trade. One is the agricultural sector, the other the automobile, and finally the pharmaceutical sector. So then we had focus group sessions with the three sectors, which were also very interesting and informative. And we came up with a very, very sort of nuanced view of how we should deal with Pak-India trade. And I'm just going to go over them very briefly. And in this particular conference, these three sectors, there are specific sessions devoted to them. So this will be a nice, I intend for this to be a nice prelude to those sessions. Anyway, so the way we've structured the presentation is that I'm going to go like Nisha, just to give a brief sort of historical outline of how trade has been between the two countries, look at secondary literature, what has been the prediction as in terms of what the aggregate trade prediction is, what the sectoral predictions are, then move on to the work which we've done. As I said, first, broader sectoral analysis, looking at sort of chambers of commerce and industry across the country, and then honing into the three very important sectors, pharmaceutical, auto, and agriculture. Now, I'm sure you're sort of, in a sense, sick of this figure. This is sort of aggregate trade balance between Pakistan and India. You've seen it quite often, and we've been talking about it. As economists, we're not quite interested in bilateral trade balances. It's the aggregate trade balance which we're interested in. So theoretically speaking, I mean, if we have a large trade imbalance with India, that can actually help us reduce the trade, our aggregate trade balance, purely because of fall in trade diversion costs. So if you're getting cheaper products from India relative to the rest of the world, then even if you have a bilateral trade deficit, that shouldn't matter. Your overall trade deficit should go down. But the thing which is more sort of perplexing here in this case is if you look at sort of the Pakistan exports and look at how Indian exports to Pakistan have changed since the first thaw of relationship, which happened around about 2002, 2003. So that, in a sense, was exemplified or came into play through an increase in the items of the positive list. So if you look at Indian exports to Pakistan, they picked up phenomenally post 2002. And you see this light sort of purplish blue line, which is going up. While if you look at Pakistan exports to India, which is the blue line, the dotted one, under those two lines, that sort of picks up around 2002, 2003, not as much as India does, but then tapers off in 2005, 2006, and hasn't quite picked up since then. Okay? So again, as an economist, you look at this, so this is an interesting sort of puzzle. You say, well, I mean, what can be the reason? So one obvious reason is, well, the size of the countries are very different. India is a very large economy, so one would imagine that its manufacturing and export potential would be greater, one. Second, again related to, in some sense, to the first, Indian manufacturing exports are more competitive. Relative to Pakistan's, there's greater value added in Indian exports relative to Pakistan's exports to India, so that's the reason why perhaps there's a trade imbalance. Third, and perhaps more importantly, the issue of market access. Perhaps it's also to do with lack of market access to India, and here the topic of non-tariff barriers comes in. Okay? So we have to think about these three hypotheses when we look into trade imbalances, also keeping in mind that as economists we're more interested in multilateral or aggregate trade balance. Now, just eyeballing figures, I've chosen 2003, 2007 because this was after the first thaw of relationship. This is when things really started to kick in. Indian exports to Pakistan went up. Pakistan also was increasing, perhaps not at the same rate. But what you see is this is Indian exports to Pakistan within this first thaw, 2003 to 2007. That across these 4 to 5 categories, you have a phenomenal increase, whether that be food and beverages, chemicals, rubber, plastics, textile, metal products, and others. In Pakistan, same story at a much lower level in terms of total value of exports to India. Again, the same period. And what is interesting is that both the countries are exporting this within the same category of product. So there's potentially a lot of intra-industry trade which is going to come up as things further normalize. Now, this is an interesting figure. This is a bubble diagram, and I'll tell you what the axes are. On the left is India, and on the right is Pakistan. And this shows the relative competitiveness of the two economies, the manufacturing export sector of the two economies. So on the x-axis, you have annual growth of country share in products' global exports. Okay, so for example, in the case of India, if you're looking at textiles, so annual average growth of textile share of India in total textiles between 2000 and 2007. On the y-axis, you have annual growth of product share in world's total exports from 2000 to 2007. So in a sense, simply put, what the x-axis is telling you is how within a country a particular product is doing. The y-axis is showing that how in the world that particular product is doing. So if you're on the northwest, if you look at that, if you're in this direction, so your positioning is very competitive. That's the happy region. That's where you want to be, okay, where you're doing well in a particular good, and that good's demand in the world market is also increasing. So that is competitive positioning. Now, the size of the bubbles is the relative size of the sector within the economy of both India and Pakistan. Now, if you look at it, first glance, you'll be like, oh, things don't look good for Pakistan, while they look fairly good for India. I mean, if you look at India, you have pharmaceutical. India has positive growth, and it's a sector which is growing in the world, pharmaceutical demand, chemicals, iron and steel, automotive products. So they're there in the happy region where one wants to be, the competitive region. On the other hand, if you look at Pakistan, there's a small presence in chemicals. There's some presence in pharmaceuticals, but Pakistan is losing its share there. Okay, that's a sunrise industry, but Pakistan is losing its share. And the rest, textile and garments and so on, are sort of sunset in the case of Pakistan. Okay, so where our share is increasing, unfortunately, the world demand is on the way down in those products. So in first glance, as I said, it sort of does not portray a very positive picture from the perspective of Pakistan. But if you look at this in the context of Pak-India trade, there's another positive story which can be spun out of it. If you look at the Indian part on the left, and if you look at the particular industries which are growing globally and within India also, chemicals, iron and steel, okay, pharmaceutical, automotive products. Chemicals, iron and steel are essential raw materials. Okay, an important industry across, especially in textile and garments. And also if you look at sort of more capital intensive, there too, these are important raw material, important inputs. So if you talk in terms of Pakistan and the fact that Pakistan is going through a major energy crisis which has hit our industry very hard. So here's an opportunity to perhaps import these products, the raw materials, chemicals, machinery from India at potentially a lower rate because of the fact that transportation costs are much, much lower. Okay? And that could actually reduce costs of production and spur industrialization in the country in times when there are other constraints which are impeding their growth. Okay? And also, to relate it to the first session, this also suggests interesting, perhaps, value chains to develop within the region across products. Okay. Now, in terms of the secondary analysis, the aggregate sort of trade models looking at sort of gravity approaches, they estimate around $10 to $20 billion trade. Nisha went over it. There is a series of RCA, revealed comparative advantage analysis on whatever limited trade there is between the two countries, which suggests that the gainers are going to be in Pakistan, textile and garments, within agriculture, fruits and dates, while losers in the context of Pakistan are going to be auto, pharma, chemicals, polyester and agriculture. So given this sort of view from the secondary data, we went to the Chambers of Commerce and Industry. And this was Sialkot, Lahore, Faisalabad and Karachi. Very, very interesting perceptions, but by and large, the three main things which came out. One, opportunities, access to a larger and growing Indian market. So if you go to Sialkot and talk to surgical people, they've been exporting to India for the past 10, 12 years. If you talk about NTBs, they say they don't face any NTBs. So what you realize is even non-tariff barriers, first, it's an informational issue. Secondly, you can think of this as endogenous to trade. As soon as trade picks up, whatever these non-tariff barriers are, they also tend to sometimes go down. Okay, and a lot of these are informational barriers. In the sense, a lot of times importers and exporters don't know the processes or protocols which are required. So that was very evident when we spoke to the surgical people. Sialkot generally was very positive. It's an export sector, competitive cluster. So they were, in a sense, very forthright and looking forward towards opening trade with India. We spoke to the sports goods sector, leather sector, even the textiles. Okay. Faisalabad. Even Faisalabad, and notwithstanding the energy crisis. By the way, this is the time when energy crisis was the highest. You had units which had been shut down. But still they looked at India as an opportunity. Growing market, growing middle class, and as a big opportunity. Thirdly, possibility of deepening trade, which in a sense also has to go side by side with opening trade in goods. That is cross-border investments, joint ventures, which will lead to technology and skills transfer. So lots of positivity came from the chamber, Karachi chamber in particular, very dynamic. I mean, they said to us, they said, well, you know, you have current figures on trade, past figures. Trade by nature is dynamic. You don't know what sectors are going to spring up in Pakistan, given the wide variety of demand in India. Okay. So in a sense, there was a very good understanding of the dynamic nature of trade, which we saw amongst the chambers. Challenges, obviously, and I don't want to sort of repeat what has been said, but very simply, this is a perception survey which captures it in a very rigorous manner. Visa restrictions, lack of banking facilities, few border crossings, infrastructure impediments, transportation, storage facilities, Indian duty structure, especially para-tariff state taxes. Again, these are informational problems in many cases. Phytosanitary requirements, quality standards. Finally, agricultural tariffs and subsidies, and I'm going to go into that. Now, as I said, I'm running short of time, so I'll just hurry it up. Okay, so once this was done, sort of visiting